Hello.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning. Can you hear me loud and clear?
Yes, I can hear you. This is Dialan here. So all the participants can see us now.
That's fine.
So I will have a quick intro into the event, and then
Yeah,
you can
but
take over.
I think because it's not at 10 o'clock, right? We have 4 more minutes. Let me try and share the
Correct.
presentation.
Correct.
Give me 1 second. I will have to connect back again after giving the permissions. 1 second, Dala.
Sure, sure.
Dalan, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you, Oshada.
Can you enable the sharing option? Because the sharing option is disabled.
Right, we'll do that now. Just give us a moment, please. You have been given permission if you would like to test it.
Yes, I'm just.
It's visible.
Yep.
Yes, it's visible.
Yep. Does that look good?
Yes, all good.
All right. Perfect. Sounds good.
So let's wait for a minute or so, and then I will have a quick intro and then hand it over to you. Pandemic, the new cyber norm. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to our National Cybersecurity Week 2020. We're here on day 3. Sri Lanka CERT is hosting this event for the 13th consecutive time. So it has been a bit of a challenge. The pandemic has changed things over and has made the physical conference into a virtual conference. A few announcements before we start with today's event. All our sessions are live telecasted on POTV, thanks to SLT and Mobitel. We also want to thank Dialogue, SLT, again Mobitel, for making the data free for all our sessions. Thank you so much. Our hacking challenge is held on the 28th of October, and we've got overwhelming response. And so far, we've had around 42 teams that has been registered. If you still would like to register for any of our events, please visit www.cert.gov.lk/CSW2020. With that, let me take you into today's session. Today, we have our special guest, Oshada Senanayake, Director General at Telecommunication Regulatory Commission of Sri Lanka. He is a visionary business and information technology professional with over 15 years of experience in corporate management, strategy implementation, business analysis, process optimization, software development, and delivery management, with exposure in working across multicultural environment and countries, including Sri Lanka, UK, and USA. He is also a director at Sri Lanka CERT. He's going to talk to us on impact on the telecommunication network on national security, which is a pretty much interesting topic. With that, let me hand over to Mr. Oshada Senanayake. Over to you, Steve. Thank you.
Thank you, Dalan, and good morning to everybody. And while we come to the third day of the Cyber Week, I think it's an interesting topic that we are coming along to in terms of looking at the impact of telecommunications networks on national security and also the impact of cyber security norms on the telecommunications network. So I'll give a on how the evolution of the telecommunications networks has moved over from traditionally being entity that connected us on telephony. If you would on the 2000s, it was just ensuring that there clear infrastructure that provided us basic connectivity in terms of voice telephony. But over the years, and importantly towards the 2005 and 6, we would all know we would all know where it has moved on to the third phase of the transformation in terms of becoming a key cog or a key infrastructure on the cloud concept, which has beyond the cloud, we have the sky cloud concept coming on as well, which is a very interesting phenomena. And in the future, there's been also a lot of new norms coming along. So the telecommunication sector being just telephony to digital telephony has moved over to a lot of convergence, providing services which include the key front that we all use now is internet. So typically a telecommunication entity has moved over ESP, right? And if you look at today, where we are literally down in the 21st century in the year 2020, moving forward further, right? And while we are aggressively moving exponential change, there's exponential innovations coming along on technology. It has applications as well. So currently, as we speak, we're talking about information technology driven phenomena such as the Internet of Things. We talk about Zigbees. There's quite a lot of technology aspects that we can go on. It's going to we behave. It's going to change our lifestyles, and it's going to change how we look at technology as opposed to how we looked at the millennia in 2000. Right? We are talking about virtual reality as well, and we are microservices coming into play as well. So the reality is that telecommunications is going to be infrastructure for any type of digitalization we speak. So there are three types of digitalization as we speak. The first aspect is digitization. You look at the first step of basically moving as an organization, or it could be a government entity from analogous environment to a digital front, very big digital fronts. But the next step is digitalization. So digitalization and digitalization. although we loosely use these two words usually, there's quite a lot of difference in. Is the next step where you look at pretty much enabling your work processes, enabling the way you interact, right? On utilizing, for example, workflows, emails to interact. We've gone from manual labor to pretty much CNC machines, digitalization. So unfortunately, as you know, there's quite a few scenarios where this used in a loosely bound way, which is a misnomer. And the third point is once you have a proper roadmap of digitalization, you end up with digital transformation. These three tenets are very important in when we talk about. And I thought it was prudent that I explain this. Now, where does the telecommunications comes in on this? The telecommunications is going to be the underlying crux of all digitalization, because even if we talk about cloud, whether we talk about connectivity in terms of OTT applications, everything is converged right on the telecommunications networks, right? Something that we are experiencing right now. Emerging challenges in the industry before I go into the imperatives of the cyber security fronts. As I mentioned, with the availability of new technology, the telecommunications industries had to fast at that matter. And you may wonder on the second point of the first para why I've highlighted that, right? The lines between technology vendors are blurring. So in technical convergence, right? From a typical scenario of just providing, for example, I'll take a very interesting example. Take, for example, a land phone years back, right now is providing us pretty much entertainment. It's providing us internet and broadband, as we call it. So what has happened over the years is convergence has struck. Maybe we never thought that a telecom provider would be saddled with the norm of pretty much providing us entertainment. Now it's happening. IPTV is real. Direct to home satellite TV is real, and it's happening right now as we speak. And even digitalization of terrestrial TV at some converge possibly with the telecom. There's so many possibilities that we can talk on that. What this means is the telecommunication industries or the networks, telecommunication networks owners has had to think a complete approach in terms of ICT innovation and the adaptation of their organizations to digital transformation. What has happened is they have had to come up with cross-functional different offerings. While they do that, the question is, where does the interest and the priorities lie in terms of cybersecurity, right? Which I will come into detail on a few slides down, right? So it's a focus on ensuring that connectivity is a must. You would know based on the UNGA's sustainable development is a must now. Connectivity is in fact even considered right in our age and era right now. Connectivity is a must. So in terms of the TR's initiatives which we've taken in that front, where as much as we talk about digitalization as a country and we are talking about digital economy, if we don't get the basic infrastructure right, the basic connectivity right, I think we will be losing the plot and we'll be back at square one. And that's why there's this program which we are driving at national where we are working across all of the districts in Sri Lanka. We are working across 14,000 plus Eldari segments, and we are working with the divisional secretariats to ensure that we get a ground feel of exactly where connectivity is. There's a mid ground where the regulator of a country as well as the industry has to meet mid ground on this front. And hence we've realized that as much as we the telecommunications industry to ensure this piece of critical infrastructure is covered, I think it's imperative, and I think it's a paradigm. As the government sector, as a government regulator, we have to also come into a mid ground of ensuring that we an acceleration that we provide. you and me, we all know as consumers, we pay a lot of taxes on top of our telecommunication services that we get, called the Telecom Development Levy. And the interesting point is, out of this, the whole mandate of this levy is almost 50% of that levy could be reinvested back at the industry in terms of looking at rural coverage, for example, right? And that's what we as a regulator right now doing. That probably the digitalization would continue. There'll be certain national discussions and decisions that would be made on that front. The latest interesting point is that a focus put on to homegrown software, homegrown organizations, and homegrown products that to be given priority on this journey. But while we are doing that, the over encapsulating, we should never forget the fact that digitalization should be over encapsulated by a very stringent cybersecurity strategy coming along on that front to ensure that we have the proper metrics, the proper frameworks, the proper institutional that as much as we provide the digitalization, as much activity, as much as we provide much required telecommunication services, we have to ensure citizen protection. I think that's the only way it's going to be sustainable. So in this point, there's quite a few challenges, right? There's a lot of new growth coming along, IoT devices coming along. So it's not a matter of just securing your device anymore. We didn't know that there's quite a lot of initiatives that was initiated. For example, the enemy management program, which maybe most of you all would have heard about on mainstream media and news, where from October 1st, TRC took a policy decision to ensure that only registered devices come into the shores of Sri Lanka. Now, that has a far-yielding repercussion. For example, there was an unlimited amount of devices into the market, for example, right? There were grade A replicas coming through. There were literally replicas of, for example, I don't want to mention brands, but for example, even iPhones for that matter. It was sad to see quite a few people or citizens swindled, where they've been sold iOS, for example, where the was Android. I mean, these are citizens who wouldn't even know a difference. There were scenarios that was evident where there were refurbished equipment coming into play, and then sold as brand new equipment, shrink wrapped, and all of that done. But in 6 months, when you want to go claim a warranty, you wouldn't even find the place that the device was sold. So I think when we look at cybersecurity, it's also very important to understand we have to ensure a root level strategy on this. We cannot just take this on hearsay. We just can't take this on just a policy level unless we come ground up on this approach, right? So as much as I talk about the latest issues in terms of IoTs, we as a nation, we as Sri Lanka, I think we have to look at the practical scenarios. We need to look at the practical and on the ground when we look at these fronts. With IoTs, as mentioned on the slide I mentioned, I mean, there's going to be give access. Right now, we connect to the internet. We might have our Google Home, our Amazon Echo Dot connected, our personal information in terms of, for example, even personal photos, for example, could be on us at the home. Our calendars are interconnected with the Google Home. So just imagine a scenario where there's a breach coming through the telecommunications infrastructure. Literally, a hacker right now could come and walk into your home, right? Sometime back, we presumed that it was just our laptop or the desktop that we use, but not anymore. So just imagine a scenario where you may have your, again, I'll take a basic example of IoT. If you have your Google Home or your Echo or Echo Dot, and just imagine a scenario where a particular intrusion can switch on the mic of your Google Home. What would that mean? And connect footprint of all your behavioral habits in terms of online, because everything is connected to Google, for example. So these are very basic example. And if you take the device level, again, as you would all know, that's why there's a lot of encouragement. If you look at even the app stores, if you take Google Play or even the Apple iStore, there's certain due diligence that is made when an app is published, right? That there are certain due diligence that's ensured to ensure the privacy of the downloading entity, which is at the end of the day the public. And that's where you would see even typical scenario will have a plaster on top of their web camera on their laptop, right? Same go for your mobile device. I mean, it could be used to pretty much eavesdrop on you, literally. I mean, it's just one small piece of code that is required on Android to the mic on your device, which will act as a eavesdropping equipment within seconds. So these are the aspects we need to look at when we look at this. Gone are the days and the era that we presume that it's just siloed into my device access. Literally, we are talking about privacy of information. We are talking about the privacy of citizens being intruded, and also more importantly, what we need to understand is personal, right? The access or the intrusions of these devices could have national repercussions. Okay, for cyber attack against a country, it's not the norm usually right now to basically, right? There could be passive nodes that's aggregated over months and years to be activated when it's required. So literally, unknown, you might be contributing to a national cyber attack as well. So I hope this gives a bit of frame of thought on how important this matter is when we move along on this front. So the communication industries, 5G networks, quite a few debates are happening. As you would know, Sri Lanka has started the 5G trials as well with all the mainstream telecom operators. There are some areas that you can latch on to 5G free of charge if you didn't know right now. And it's about adapting to new technologies, but adapting it in a way that we have certain due diligence that's been carried out. As you would all know, that's quite a technological race towards the first to being matured at 5G in terms of providers, in terms of countries. But as a nation, we have to be very resilient and robust in terms of our approach in ensuring we take a secure approach. Yes, 5G looks quite interesting and enthralling. And while we talk about 5G right now, 6G research has started on the labs as well, right? Where it's going into 4D implementations. But again, the point of the matter is we have to look at quite a few angles on this. One is from a citizen level, one is from a governmental level, as well as a national level. Networking equipment, we are talking about radio equipment, and then we are talking about how can we be resilient as a nation as we keep on. We have to be very, very considerate in terms of the impact it could have, unless if we have a networks. Because when you take 5G, it's not about 1G plus download speeds. It's not about that. We are talking IoT devices. We are talking about latency times down 100 milliseconds to 1 millisecond, theoretically. If you ask me, the reaction time of 220 milliseconds, and if you train yourself as much as possible, the maximum we can go of is a reaction level of 200 milliseconds. It's human nature based on research. But 5G, they're talking about 1 millisecond. So why is 1 millisecond latency quite important? I'll just give you an example. Is we are talking about V2V communication, vehicle to vehicle communication. We are talking about smart traffic management. So in these scenarios, latency times is very important. Take, for example, two vehicles moving at each other at 100 kilometers per hour. The latency is very important to ensure, for example, collision avoidance systems, right? Every millisecond counts. So to give an example, if the human at 60 miles per hour or 60 kilometers per hour takes 40 feet to stop a vehicle, based on 5G V2V technology, literally the vehicle could be stopped within about 4 to 5 inches. So that sums up a situation, right? But however, again, we're talking about IR 4.0, the Industrial Revolution 4.0. We're talking about completely automating and completely converging technology on towards the aspects of pretty much production, right? And the industries. So it's very have baseline security to ensure that it cascades back to these industries, or as we as individuals even using it for our personal use. So it's very important. And secure and reliable services, again, as we would know, as I mentioned earlier, the telecom providers do not only provide vanilla services right now in terms of connectivity. They are providing a bouquet of services that is cross-cutting, as I mentioned earlier, cross standard and typical telecommunication services to entertainment and media, right? As much as we do this, it's important again that we have certain security measures in place. So as it's mentioned, these technologies are cutting across retailers, financial institutions, and governments, schools, and even us as individuals. Now, the interesting point here is there's a concept called critical information infrastructure. So, as some of you all may know who are into technology and cybersecurity, in the audience, defining critical information infrastructure is an imperative as any country, right? If you get your strategy wrong in terms of identifying your critical information infrastructure, I'm taking example of critical information structures. For example, let's take for example the central bank website and the web portal. Take for example the Colombo Stock Exchange and its applications that's literally running the stock exchange. Take for example certain systems that may be running our power plants, for example, right? The software aspect and the connectivity aspect of it. Imagine a situation where there's a threat on any of these services. It can literally take down our economy within seconds, right? And the impact could be billions of rupees, right? And I'll drive home this point with example that we all experienced, I think about 6 to 8 weeks back. Unfortunately, we had a power outage which ran for almost a day, right? What was our experience? Our experience was we realized that we cannot connect. We couldn't survive without air conditioning. We couldn't connect to our work as usual as we used to do. There was disruptions on certain social functions that was already in place. And even though you didn't know, there was quite a lot of impact on the telecommunication networks as well, because the resilience that's built upon, for example, on the infrastructure, for example, the towers, some of the towers can only run for certain amounts in terms of backup generation, or even certain towers that is fueled by battery backups, right? And maybe some of you all experienced, maybe you all didn't, but not all. I think I should give that credit to the telecommunication industry. But there was a certain level of impact that we understood that came from a blackout. Now imagine a scenario, right, of a complete internet blackout in Sri Lanka, right? Forget just 1 hour, just 10 hours, right? Just on organizations, the complete structure is going to come down from a private sector point of view, capacitate the workforces. It's going to incapacitate the organizations that is providing, right, real-time services for international clientele, and it's going to have long-term repercussions of continuity of utilizing those services, right? So imagine basically taking down main utilities such as water and electricity, for example. That certain aspects is still driven, even in Sri Lanka, is driven on information. So in terms of critical information infrastructure, it is not just websites, as with the website getting hacked. It's the threat is real. That we have to look at in terms of understanding: are we resilient? Communication networks resilient enough to basically have a right response back threat, right? So that's why it's very important on the second point of ensuring secure and reliable services. And secure and reliable services doesn't mean just ensuring uninterrupted broadband connectivity anymore, from what I explained. And there are new trends coming along as well. For example, artificial intelligence, right? There are quite a few examples. Again, I'll take a very basic example. Even if you take the latest smartphone, it will give you predictive analysis on your sleep time, and also even your consumption of screen time, right? It'll predict basically what your screen times have been and give you even a drill down of what sort of applications you've been consumed based on an hour and a minute drill down, right? So I think artificial intelligence is real, and then it's I just give an example of Pokemon Go sometime back, which took by storm, and then it so a complete downturn as well as much as it came up. But the reality is AI is real. And again, as we speak about Siris and the Alexas, as I mentioned earlier on as well, it is real. But how can we, from a cybersecurity aspect, look at AI? How can network infrastructures look at AI from this perspective? Is from a point where these sort of threats, it can predict the threat vectors moving around. It can predict even looking at even the constituents in terms of a network infrastructure perspective. It is you and me who basically connected to our networks in terms of mobiles, or we connect into ISPs in terms of getting our home broadband. We are all constituents, right? So just imagine a situation where an ISP can give a value-added services to reach out to a constituent in layman's terms to say, look, your computer may have an intrusion, or your mobile phone might have an intrusion or a threat vector that is being noted, right? We all know, for example, sometimes when you go onto Google, there are certain instances that Google throws back you a message saying that there's abnormal traffic that's been generated from your computer, and hence you should try again in a few moments. So these threat vectors are not something that cannot be predicted and looked at without access to your computer. It could be looked at and measured from outside, right? So that's the interesting part. So I think technology has driven there, and the question is, as a telecommunication industry, whether we are embracing that aspect. Okay. And the Internet of Things I've explained quite well so far on how it is coming through with examples. So let's move on to the potential cyber threats on telecommunication networks. What types of cyber threats are we looking at? As much as we think that it's a siloed approach in terms of our own internal networks, it is not. So as per GSMA and ITU, one of the critical aspects is the supply chain in itself. Now, I mentioned that we've gone into a cloud era. Now, let's take, for example, the local context where almost all the top end service providers are providing cloud services, both for corporate usage, but of course, for even personal usage, we can use it. But right now, we've been used to a scenario of using public clouds that's on offer globally, such as it could be Azure, it could be also Amazon EC2, for example, or it could be very basic tiered shared hosting, such as GoDaddies and the likes of what we potentially use to even throw up a website or a web application. But the supply chain, if you come back to the telecommunication networks, offering that they do to the constituents or the users. More often than not, there are third parties involved in setting up this infrastructure. There are third parties that is coming in, manage this infrastructure in different levels. So the hardware level, it could be the software and the enablement level, the virtualization level. So there could be multiple entities that could be engaged, which is the norm. But the imperative is the due diligence to ensure that when these third-party vendors are selected and engaged, that there are certain amount of due diligence and baseline frameworks and parameters to ensure that protection layers, that security considerations are also drilled down onto the supply chain, right? So that's we also call it on a value chain. It's the upstream aspect of any business. So the upstream aspect has to be looked at, and it's important that the industry looks at the due diligence, not just looking at the internal aspects, but also ensuring that certain frameworks that are in place are cascaded down to their supply chains. So the next interesting point comes to the privacy and data protection. That's where you and me are interested more so than not, as citizens and as users and as constituents. How does privacy and data protection work on this front, and what is the implication for telecommunication providers on this front? Now, as you would all know, Sri Lanka still do not have a data protection act in place, but the good news is that there is a data protection act right now which is at the final stages and in draft stages. So if you take the European front, the European Union front, they've got the GDPR that has been enacted from 2017 onwards, 3 years back. If you take our neighbors such as India, they've got the Sri Krishna report that comes in and they define their data protection in certain terms, which they have their own homegrown data protection act, which is defined by this framework called the Sri Krishna report. So Sri Lanka right now, the good news is that we are coming along with our own data protection act as well. So what would this data protection act do? For example, again, I'll give you a basic example. One aspect is what all of us as users are saddled with is spam and unsolicited messages, right? If you remember, just something that I did as soon as I took over was to ensure that there was some sort of sanity and regulation put across thousands of messages sent across by different operators in terms of unsolicited marketing messages, and where there, it was a mandatory opt-out that was put in. So if I want to get a particular entity to send me updates, I can opt in. If I don't, I can. Data Protection Act, this will be more stringent, because at the end of the day, when we provide data to a particular entity, as we call it a data controller, right? A data controller is, it could be any entity that we provide our information to purpose. For example, it could be a hospital, it could be a telecommunication service provider, or it could be any other service provider that could be basically providing you utilities, for example. So that particular data sets can only be used for that particular purpose. But however, right now, without legislation, there's no framework to drive home this point, whereas certain entities could use our data for certain other different activities. Well, obviously, which shouldn't be the case, right? So the Data Protection Act coming on will ensure that, like the GDPRs of the likes that we heard, that the owners, that the citizens will have the right to define and dictate what that data should be used for, right? And even have the right to basically, at the end of that particular service period, demand even the erasure of that such particular data, right? Now, when we take it from a cyber data protection, as you would all know, there's so many incidents that comes into play. As much as we can have legislation, what if there's a attack, a breach of private information, right? Now we all know, I don't want to mention a certain brand. There was an incident a couple of years back on the banking and finance industry in Sri Lanka, where there's a huge list of account details that went out, right? So you need to, so who's answerable for these sort of things? For example, if there's a breach in terms of the telecommunications front, for example, right now it's not just a mobile number connectivity that we have with our telecommunication service provider. We have our broadband access, we have our personal access footprints over there, but you take it to another step and we extend it to our corporate world. All of our sensitive business information could be lying on a cloud platform that is provided by industry. So the privacy and data protection is one aspect, is the private aspect of it, but then the other thing is also from a business perspective, from a corporate perspective, because at the end of the day, data is key for any organization right now. If you talk about IP, intellectual property, the secrecy of the aspects, and then if that data is breached, if that data is basically passed on to the wrong hands, it can have unrecoverable repercussions. So it's very important that we have to have mechanisms, and we are having mechanisms to ensure that operators have a stringent approach in terms of ensuring their data footprints are looked at, the data flows are looked at, and then the controls and mechanisms are in place to ensure there's a stringent, robust framework to ensure privacy and data protection of its constituents. Both, again, I'm talking as a perspective of private data as well as corporate data. Now, there's a third very interesting phenomena, as I explained earlier, is the critical information. Now, we talked about a personal front and the corporate front. Now, imagine the critical information infrastructure that is now based in these cloud environments that's provided by telecommunication network providers, right? And just imagine a breach of this, it will have a national repercussion. It will have a national repercussion in terms of breaching of data and espionage. So these are examples of how important it is. Although we may think that throwing our data it got absolute security. Well, it's not, right? I hate to burst the bubble. It's not. Even if you throw, for example, now there comes this again the situation: would a local cloud be secure than a public cloud out there? It again depends on the types of data sets, right? For example, there could be certain data sets that would have to have a local constituency, right? So the data residency has to be within the locality of that country, and in these terms, Sri Lanka, right? There could be certain data sets, of course, you can decide, okay, it's fine. There's the sensitivity could be quite less, and yes, of course, you can go on a public cloud, for example, like the brands and the offerings that I mentioned earlier, right? But again, the importance is if you don't data protection right with stringent approach of a proper cybersecurity planning, we are at a very very bad situation, right? Then another example that we as we move on from a more technical ground is signaling. So telecommunications are all about signaling. The latest SIPs are there. Then you got the old SS7 brute attacks that comes along on systems. So we need to ensure, I mean, we as a regulator as well, that's something we are working in tandem with the telecommunications providers in Sri Lanka, is to ensure that certain protocols that is adopted are looked at on a longer term from a security perspective as well, right? So as I always say, there has to be controls and mechanisms that has to be there, right? And it is very important that we move away from legacy technology, right? That as we go along could be pretty much become vulnerable, right? I mean, it's a very simple term. I mean, I mean, the old adage of us using an older browser, for example, right? If you were use a browser 4 to 5 versions back, well, you are exposing yourself to certain threats that might be closed with patches coming in with the latest updates. The same goes along for core networking and the radio networking infrastructure, even for a telecommunications network service provider. But this has far more reaching repercussions for all the reasons that I've been explaining so far, right? And again, um, as I explained already, the cloud, as much as we've transformed the way we work, the way we transform the way we decentralize all our data into clouds, right? The accountability factor has to come in. I've explained about the Internet of Things already, right? The Internet of Things is not just the Google Homes and the Alexas as we talk about from a personal front, but we are also talking about from industrial point as we explained as well, and as well as from a device front, as I again already explained. Vulnerable devices that could be attached to any network could have uh, threats to your own security in terms of your data privacies, as well as become a node that could be part of a cyber attack, even to the country as well. So it's very important we understand these key tenets in terms of these cyber threats and what impact it has on a far more outreaching front. Couple of types of cyber threats. This is a bit more technical. So we've got the threats that's called SS7. We've got the SIP hacking. So SIP hacking is a latest phenomena that almost all our offices, we work in offices that we use. Where if you want to do call trunking or you want to have agent networks, it's a very simple adage of pretty much getting VoIP. It's interfacing VoIP with the core networks of information. So SIP is called session initiated protocols, and it works on VoIP, as I explained. Interestingly, it is a prime target for malicious attacks, and I'm talking but also from a global perspective. So as much as maybe we could be CIOs, we could be the CISOs in our organization, Chief Information Security Officers, or we could be the stakeholders of ownership of the organization. We ensure there's governance protocols and measures taken to even go up to a level of, is my PABX secure, right? As much as we are focusing possibly on IT governance, just looking at the insurance of security governance for our clouds, as well as our endpoint security. Have you ever thought about how insecure could our PABX be? So a PABX interconnects all of the communications that could go through within organization as well. So the point of my slide over here is there are aspects that we usually don't tend to think that are important, but there are underlying infrastructure that we never we should bring into the foray and start ensuring we have controls on that. So SIP hacking is one example on that front as well. So these are some of the list of cybersecurity threats based on GSMA from last year. So SIP trunk hacking. So SIP trunk, again, as I mentioned, is a common phenomena used by large organizations where it has a call center or agent network, or even a reception that it routes back call routing to internal systems. Call ID spoofing is something very interesting, and it's very serious. And in fact, this is something that we are working on right now, where we've also noticed, for example, that there are call ID spoofing, where, for example, I may have your mobile number or even your landline, and I can spoof that number and call another person, and it could mean that the other party will see that I'm calling as another party. So it's impersonating person A as person B taking on his number. So the call ID display in trivial terms would display another person's number. So this call ID spoofings and all of that, there are mechanisms that we can have, on INIs, and there are technical terms that we have. So there are certain mechanisms we can also ensure we can trace back all of these. And the DDoS attacks on PBX systems, for example, as I mentioned, this is huge. For example, there could be scenarios that your networks could be having outage, and you may not know that it's even a DDoS attack, right? And what you could do is basically, even as the ISP, you could be just increasing bandwidth, right? But increasing bandwidth is the point where you're oblivious to the fact that there could be a DDoS attack. So this goes into the ISP level as well, where there could be attacks on the IP fronts as well, ISP fronts as well, which I'll give you some examples shortly as well. So why security is an imperative? I think I've explained in no uncertain terms. Important, right? These are some interesting statistics, right? I mean, we have close to 6 billion plus consumers depending on ISPs and operators to move. And as I mentioned earlier, if you look at the second point, connectivity, basic human right, although you and me might be oblivious to it under the UN Article 192, right? So it's from a government level, it's from ISP level, and even from a critical level, connectivity is key. And connectivity cannot be made robust unless we have a very resilient cybersecurity readiness approach to ensure that we have a very stringent approach, a very robust approach, right? And as we move towards the 5G era, as I explained earlier, right, with intelligent connectivity, this is going to, the impact, the threat vector, as we call it, is going to exponentially increase, right? And as you would all know, let's forget about telecommunication network, cyber attacks is right now considered the third highest global risk, right? And this is according to the WEF, the World Economic Forum, right? And then it's important that in the industry recognize this factor. And we as consumers and citizens also has to recognize that. And I think that's what's important. We have to ensure that we also have some sort of sanitization that we get used to, digital sanitizations and hygiene, as I call it. If you don't have a digital hygiene, for example, I clicking any sort of email that comes through. I mean, the most common cyber attack still, the originating point is spam email, right? So we clicking and consuming unnecessary information. So we got to be wary of that as well. As much as we can have all these structures and frameworks in place and controls in place, I think it comes back down to, as during the COVID situation we have, like personal hygiene, as I call it, we should have digital hygiene to ensure that we also contribute as a positive stakeholder and not as a negative stakeholder in getting ourselves breached, right? Moving on. So these are some examples, as I mentioned, to showcase the gravity of the cyber attacks on companies globally. So these are three incidents that's coming from the in the UK, which I've taken as a case in point, right? And you can see the impact it has had on the organization. So on the first scenario, TalkTalk, which you all knew back about 4 years back, where there's about 100,000 plus consumer information that went out, right? So it has a direct impact on the organization of close to 60 million plus pounds GBP. But the interesting part, if you notice, the Information Commissioner's Office, so that's where when a cybersecurity the Data Protection Act comes in, there'll be a regulator that comes in to regulate this data protection. And if you look at the Information Commissioner's office, fine, on the organization, right? That stands at a staggering 400,000 GBP as well, right? So this is an example of how we need to ensure there's controls, right? How we need to ensure legislation also comes to speed. Unfortunately, in Sri Lanka, right now, even the Telecommunication Regulatory Commission is working on an act which has been drafted in 1991, right? That's literally 3 decades back. And that 1991 act has been based on the 1982 British legislation. So you can imagine, literally, we are working on a 4-decade-old act, whereas at that point, there's not even phenomena of social media has come in, right? So I think it's important right now. I'm glad to say that we are working on this. We've initiated first critical steps in ensuring that we amend the act, we look at a new act that gives robustness for this far more important cybersecurity implications, national security implications, as well as protecting the citizens' rights and ensuring citizen protections on the digital. Much as we talk about digital transformation as a country, it's very important that we look at all of these aspects as well. Again, a couple of more examples. You'd also know Three, which is one of the leading with Vodafone's and all of that, a leading entity in UK. Again, there was a scenario in 2016 also. But interestingly, as we look in the UK, most of a threat attack on a certain telco operator in Sri Lanka as well a few months back, which was averted successfully. But what we need to understand is there's never a case of being 100% against cyber attacks, even as a telecommunication network. It's about, do we have the controls and the strategy in place? Now, CERT has a 2019 to 2023 5-year strategic plan with 6 trust areas being looked at. But we have to ensure that impetus is pushed forward to ensure that the telecommunications networks are also looked at on a priority basis. One more thing I would want to raise up it, as much as I've given you now a full overview or a summary overview, which I can do in 45 minutes, which I've been given by CERT, while I could discuss an hours on a deep dive. Let's go undersea right now. Now, we've been talking about the surface issues, but let me wake you up to an interesting point of the connectivity in its real terms. As you would know, the world is interconnected in terms of internet, and the core network infrastructures with countries are interconnected with hundreds of thousands of undersea submarine cables on fiber, right? And if you take per day, there's 10 trillion plus financial transactions occurring because of this connectivity. And interestingly, if you take Sri Lanka, we 5+ undersea cable connections to Sri Lanka, right? So we have landing stations on particular points. We have one direct landing station as well, I think, which is a huge achievement for Sri Lanka as well. Two aspects of undersea cable integration. So one is you do a fork from a cable that goes around the country, and the second point is having a direct landing. So the advantage of a direct landing station is multifold. One is the fact that as part of a consortium, so undersea cables are done by consortiums of telecommunication providers in multiple that comes into a consortium or a JV to initiate. So there are different. And interestingly, if you take the direct landing station for SIMI4 in Sri Lanka, the interesting part is that all of the European traffic that comes to Sri Lanka goes in the Eastern Singapore front and Japan, right? So it's a critical front where all of this data lands in Sri Lanka, moves over to the far East front, right? Which is an interesting phenomena. From a technical point of view, it's a lot of interesting latency parameters that you can even set up a national data center, for example, with a low amount of latency. So the latest data centers, as you would know, India, Amazon and Microsoft has set up in India, for example, if I'm not mistaken, in Bangalore and Mumbai. The key imperative for these sort of giants multinationals to come and set up is one is latency and what is a stringent and robust network again. So our infrastructure right now goes on the standard MPLS networks, but the latest trend is the CLOS architectures, where you basically break up your soft services plus the infrastructure. So you can do a real-time switching for redundancy, which is called the CLOS switching, right? And plus with the low latencies that could come in with a direct landing, there could be advantages we can take as a nation. For example, setting up our own, maybe national, even inviting the likes of the larger corporations, as I mentioned earlier, to come back and use Sri Lanka as a potential destination for their data requirements. But coming back to my point, it's also imperative that we ensure cybersecurity across the fiber undersea cables as well. There's a lot of hearsay that is being coming up. Could different countries even eavesdrop on fiber optics, for example? Could there be physical attacks on points? So imagine Sri Lanka's fiber networks being impacted by a physical attack, right? Overnight, completely connectionless. So these are far-reaching repercussions, and I'm proud to say that Sri Lanka is taking a head on this as well in coming up with an undersea cable resilience framework, a security framework, which we finalized the first sessions. So these are pragmatic steps we are taking as a country. The whole point again is to understand that cybersecurity in terms of telecommunication networks and its impact on national security has far more reaching, broader repercussions, and the engagement has to be across multitudes of different target audience. We as citizens, users, and constituents, the telecommunication network service providers, the basically constitutes frameworks such as CERT, and potentially in the future we are looking at the cyber security law coming on in as well, which could constitute a cyber security for Sri Lanka as well, which will have a far more broader mandate in defining the structures that is required for a very pragmatic and very futuristic digital roadmap we are looking at. So this is today, and I believe this gave you a quick brief, which I've gone over for by 5 minutes as well, on the importance of network infrastructure in terms of cybersecurity. If anybody would want to connect with me on a direct on, I would glad to connect on, and you can always reach out to me on my TRC emails or through if anybody is interested in partnering us. In terms of if you have the skill sets, if you want to partner up as volunteers, there's so much of opportunity. So I would want to lay that off as well before I sign off. Back to you, Dayalan. I think you're on mute, Dayalan.
You're right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for taking your time and being with us on this day. I should say that it's been an amazing talk by you, giving us an insight of impact on the telecommunication network on national security. Just to highlight a few things that you spoke today, you all started off with the evaluation of networks, which is pretty much interesting, and the emerging challenges in the industry that we see today, even in Sri Lanka. There are a lot of things we spoke about, data, affordable, reliability, but I would like to pose out a question to you there. Now, as what I've seen comparing to other countries, the data, the amount that we pay for data is quite high in Sri Lanka. As a regulator, can anything be done just to make our constituents, to make it affordable for public out there? Because I still see that it's just comparing with other countries. We're still unlimited in terms of the amount of data given is also limited, and it's a bit higher. So, is there anything where TRC can do to regulate them?
Absolutely. Yeah. So there's no forum that I don't get this question, Alan. So thanks for raising this up. So let me get back to some specifics on this matter of the costs of data. So as per the latest International Telecommunication Union, the ITU report, which we have no control of, absolutely independent report, right? The latest 2019 report, as per the statistics, Sri Lanka stands for voice. I mean, most of you would be surprised. And I would invite you all to go to the ITU website to revalidate what I say, and I am saying this responsibly. For voice services, Sri Lanka has come on the top 10 cheapest countries, and this is after normalizations with the GDPs, right? This is after normalization, so it's not just a linear modeling that they've done, right? So we are on the top 10. We are the ninth cheapest in the world right now as we speak, right behind the top countries like Norway, Switzerland, and the likes of France and all of that. We are on the ninth spot, right? Ninth place. But when it comes to data, right, it's another metric. So there are two baskets, right? The low consumption basket and the high consumption basket. So which is also good because they haven't taken a generic approach. So we stand for in general terms, we are the 26th cheapest in the world for data services, right? Now, I personally also believe that this has to improve. This has to still improve, right? But let's admit it, right? Out of 195 countries, I think if I take off my TRC hat off, even I was thinking, look, I'm paying too much for data in Sri Lanka, right? But if you look at right now, we are the 26th, and I've done some metrics, and I'm willing to share those details as well. I've done a survey against neighboring countries, and we are at a very interesting place. And this is as per the last year's report, so which looks at the 2018 statistics. Now, interestingly, I want to bring to the point some mechanisms or steps we've taken proactively as the regulatory commission during April of the COVID. Now we understood once the COVID hit, we understood the traditional behavior patterns that we were used to as citizens went out of the window, and it was imperative that we ensure that the operators bring in a new dodge of offerings. Now, if we take the work from home packages we have and the study from home packages, for the first time now the issue is that I've seen low adoption now. As much as we talk about the rates, now we have kids engaging on education at home as families. Now, if you look at the education from home packages, which we've advocated, now I should state that we had absolute 100% support from the operators on this front. If you look at the offerings, you can get a GB as low as 6 rupees. And I'm saying this with absolute responsibility, right? If you look at a per GB rate for children, it could go on Microsoft Teams, it could go on Google Classrooms, it could go on Zoom, right? I personally have also subscribed to these services as a parent, and we get a GB at 6 rupees. Now, when we had a leadership forum just about 3 months back, where all the leads and the heads of the regulatory bodies of countries connected, the question came in from, I didn't want to mention the countries, on how we implemented this, because no country has implemented this for education. Now, Alan, I want to make it a point at this forum to state we are the only country right now that is providing free of charge data for accessibility to all the e-learning platforms from K-12, from grade 1 to 12, the e-CSW platform, which is the Ministry of Education's official platform for all the state schools. And we haven't stopped at that. We have given complete access to the Learn e-learning management system for all the universities, right? And this is at no cost, zero cost. You can even download terabytes of data in terms of consuming data as a student, right? And I think this is the first, I think, in the world, and which was also appreciated by this forum in regulatory front. And we haven't that as a temporary measure. We are continuing to provide the service as of today, whereas you can connect onto this. And today, as we speak, from April, the consumption of Taxalava has increased to 3 million hits per day on the platform. So I think I've given detailed enough answer to that. Work with the industry in ensuring we reduce the rate, but we have to also understand it's a fine thin line. We have to ensure that operators some sort of profitability to ensure there are reinvestments done for connectivity, right? Sri Lanka, I'm not at all happy with the connectivity status of Sri Lanka. We have 2000 plus. Look at 4G. Our metrics for 4G so far has been based on population, which is not the right metric. We have to go on geo approach. Because, for example, when we talk about industrialization and IoT, it's not about focusing on population. There could be areas where a person wants to go and do agri-farming, agri-tech with agri-tech. And if you don't have connectivity, well, how can you do that? So there's a lot of pragmatic steps taken. And I think it will continue with these steps taken. I'm truly certain that the next IT report, I think we should come to the top 20, if not better.
Thank you for your answer. So again, back to what you spoke. We also spoke about, you spoke about 5G network, the 4G, and where we stand. You spoke about critical infrastructure in terms of that we have in Sri Lanka and reasons behind. You spoke about AI and the involvement and the in terms of some problem in most parts of the world. Correctly said that the Data Protection Act is in the drafting stage, and hopefully we'll have that soon. You spoke about call ID spoofing, DDoS on PBX, and there's a lot of things that we spoke. And more interestingly, you spoke about TalkTalk, which I remember, I mean, years back. That is something that even people had the option in UK, for example. It was simple to what I remember. I think there was an SQL injection on our website, and the site was compromised. As a result, the youngster was able to get loads of data. As a result of that, most of the people walked away. And but what we see in Sri Lanka is that even if that happens to one of the telcos, the choices that we have is quite less. Sometimes that's something that I see. And with that, I hope we can take some questions, if that's okay by you. So the first questions that I would like to pose out to you is, we've got loads of them coming up, but I would ask you the most appropriate ones. So the first one, okay, where do I start? Right. Okay. As I'm aware, recently Telecom cloud system was attacked, and I guess still they're recovering from it. Can you explain what kind of attack that had root cause of it? What are the preventive actions? I mean, they're just asking about the attack. I mean, yeah, is there anything that you have on that?
So yes. So I would mention brand names again because it could happen to any infrastructure. But it was a very interesting case in point. But to answer that question directly, it was not on the cloud infrastructure. Thankfully, it was not the cloud infrastructure. But it was a ransomware attack which impacted certain operators' internal information structures. And I think there was certain action taken. And yes, of course, when there's a breach of that sorts, the response and the recovery takes time. But I think the critical takeout of this situation is that, again, attacks could come in different vectors. It could be a ransomware attack. In this instance, it was Revil. Isinobaki Revil, which was a known threat vector. But the reality is, if you look at the other countries, we need to have real-time infrastructure to ensure that we know the threat footprint. Now, for example, we've now access to a particular tool which can even look at the constituent basis and even have a threat footprint of exactly what sort of bot attacks are occurring, what sort of bot threat attacks are going on. So, for example, there's something called Poodle now. The latest information that I was perusing the last couple of days, Gamaru and Poodle are top two vectors that's basically impacting Sri Lankan nodes. So these are things that we have to look at proactively at this point. So the answer is, attacks could come. Yes, an attack came. It was isolated only through the network infrastructure, internal network infrastructure. But I mentioned earlier, there has to be a resilient structure put in to ensure that the cloud services are basically isolated. So there are a couple of things that could be done. One is physical aspects that we look at, but then there are certain virtualization that is used and modeled across globally as a best practice. So you isolate certain critical infrastructure clouds to the other clouds, the shared clouds, based on virtualization, right? So virtualization could go on different parameters. There are open source platforms, there are the different platforms that is proprietary. I don't want to mention again any brand names, but there are certain steps that could be taken. But of course, again, we need a bad sort of approach. You need to simulate this attack. You need to have the infrastructure ready. Most over the culture, the organizational culture, right, has to be set in tone where you prioritize the cybersecurity aspects. And I can confirm that right now the top priority is on that. So, which is a good first step. transformation. And right now, there's a lot of discussions, a lot of strategic discussions and activities happening, and action plans put in place to ensure that this doesn't reoccur.
Thank you so much. We've got another interesting one. Since mobile import restricted, authorized importers trying to keep large margins. For example, $699 iPhone. Local companies advertising for 190,000 plus. How do we control the price? Do you
See,
have?
pricing at the end of the day, the IMI number restriction was old adage. It was not a new rule. As per the Telecommunication Act, each importer had to ensure that whatever the equipment that has been brought in had to be legitimate and it had to be registered. So it was not a new norm. It was just that we enacted that law, right? Because we were saddled with the issue of thousands of complaints coming through consumers who has been impacted by these situations, right? As I mentioned, fake phones, we were talking about phones that was replicas, we were talking about phones that has been refurbished and sold twice the price. So I think this rule is to ensure consumer protection. But if you look at the pricing, I believe personally that entities cannot do that, because at the end of the day it's going to normalize, and people have quite a lot of options, right? Authorized sellers cannot do that. And to just to reiterate, we haven't restricted individuals from getting down phones. For example, still if you're on a holiday, we have stopped our overseas travel because of COVID, but on a typical scenario, if you travel on business or on leisure and you decide to buy a phone, we have no restriction of a person bringing down phones for personal use, and there's an online system that you can register without even a visit to TRC. This is to ensure that the law is not flaunted by unscrupulous entities that is bringing down phones on the gray market and basically putting in jeopardy consumers. So pricing, again, the CA is there, and I will note that as well. So please send us if there's any that sort of unfairness. Anybody can write to us on cc@trc.gov.lk or call us on 1900 hotline, and then or even write to me on dgtsl@trc.gov.lk. I engage a lot with consumers on fronts. So reach out to us and give us this information, and we are happy to investigate.
Thank you so much for being open and answering all the questions. And there's one more thing. Why Sri Lanka is not having a telco cert yet? Maybe I can say a few things on that, but then I would like you to add on to that. To what I understand, I've been with CERT for the last 5 years. This is something Mr. Lal, our CEO of Sri Lanka CERT, has always initiated. To what I know, there's been few meetings held, but not sure whether you are part of that. Yeah, that's the question. So do you think, what is your thoughts on?
So I think absolutely important question again. So I concur with that person who put in that question. And I think we should have a telco cert. But the imperatives are, we shouldn't have a hearsay telco cert. We need to have the core competencies that's required to run a telco cert, which the good news is we are working right now, right? We are working on hands-on approach on ensuring that we are doing the capacity building. We are bringing the best of the breed, best practices from global firms. Just yesterday, I was in touch with the Carnegie Mellon University, SAI, the engineering unit, which is known for taking strides in cybersecurity norms, and they're willing to help us. For example. So the question is, yes, we need to have a telco cert. Absolutely, yes, and I concur. We are working on it. So far, we haven't had it, but also we are taking it in a very, very hands-on step of ensuring we have the necessary core competencies to ensure that a potential telco cert has the capability to ensure a positive impact on the industry.
Thank you. This is something that I ask. So in terms of lawful interception, we've seen in US, there's a law called in communications with a court order. So what is the procedure in Sri Lanka? I mean, is that possible? What is the requirement, or has?
No, Dylan. So right now, see that's the key imperative. I think in Sri Lanka the legislation doesn't provide for that, right? And that's where there's so many metrics we are looking at right now. For example, as much as I think I'm a personal advocate of the right to provide opinion. But in that situation, if you even look at the social media front, there has to be a stringent approach to ensure there's timely interventions when citizens are in a situation of bother, for example, by certain incidents. But I think that's where the legislation has to be looked at. And I think, I mean, these aspects have been looked at. But right now, we don't have that scenario right now, Darren, unfortunately. We don't have provisions for such acts, although certain countries have, of course. I think these has to be, even if you look at it in the future, we have to have a proper governance framework when if we ever implement these, to ensure that these are used for the rightful purposes, and then not for any other purpose. So as much as we look at these pragmatic steps, as I always believe, the governance frameworks, the governance aspects has to be looked at.
Right. Thank you so much. And there's so many other questions coming up, but we are limited with time. I think one more last question. The Google company tried some data communication method by using balloons in Sri Lanka. Again, I'm not sure whether you are part of this, but can you briefly explain why this failed, to your understanding?
This was previous to my tenure with the TRC. Let me not go back on to specific on that. I think it's a well documented case, and anybody who do a simple Google search can get the feedback on that. But however, let me throw this back. Sri Lanka right now has enough infrastructure. If you look at our fiberization plan, we pretty much connected all the key areas. It's just a matter of ensuring that there's certain focus put into last mile connectivity. If you look at our 4G connectivity, it's important that we look at a pragmatic. It has to be true 4G, right? Just because it's popping up a 4G on your phone doesn't mean it is 4G, right? So our point is, we have the infrastructure, and as I always mention, if the regulator comes into terms and understands its role in ensuring that active role that it has to play in ensuring connectivity, I don't think we need to bank on this sort of external aspects. We need to have a very sustainable infrastructure in place, right? And with our fiberization and with our capabilities of the existing the telecommunication industry, I think I firmly believe that we can drive infrastructure. Now, for example, the government of Sun within a program has just started off its first project for Ratnapura district, and we are putting up 37 new towers in terms of creating connectivity. And I'm talking about absolute rural areas that even haven't had telephonic connectivity, right? So we are not talking about rural areas that is far away from Colombo. Even the suburbs, certain areas doesn't have it. So to answer the question, I think, rather than looking at the past, I think the future is that I believe that we have the necessary infrastructure and a very strong telecommunication industry that is working hand in hand with us right now as a regulator in driving forward to ensure 100% broadband connectivity for Sri Lanka, possibly by the end of 2021. I know COVID, I'm not a man for excuses, but COVID has stunted some of our work. But we are looking at that ambitious plan of 2021, and that's a personal target for me in ensuring I ensure that the connectivity piece is there, so that the economy could thrive, the startups could thrive, and the SMEs could thrive, and this whole digitalization dream is not just a dream, but it's a reality.
Absolutely, and we wish it comes true. One more question before we finish this off. What guidelines or policies which mandate to the mobile operator locally hosted data centers by TRC or local government to ensure the data?
So same
It's not
question that
very
I
clear,
mentioned earlier.
unfortunately, and
Yeah.
I don't want to interpret. Sorry.
Yeah, so this I think I answered this question earlier with the data protection aspects coming in, right? We need to have drill down measures, drill down governance frameworks to ensure that sort of data protection, right? So again, the question again arises: even the CII is the critical information infrastructure. Should it go on a cloud infrastructure provided by an ISP, or should the country have its own national data center, for example? So these are all questions that we are addressing right now, right? And I think the data protection aspect coming into play would answer quite a few of these aspects, but it's more towards personal. But yes, we are looking at this cloud infrastructure and the governance framework for those as well. So the reality is, Darling, that's quite a few aspects we are catching up on, right? I'm going to admit to that, and I don't lay the blame on anybody. I think, as I always say, we need to look to the future, and right now I think we have the best opportunity to leverage on. I mean, these are absolutely brilliant questions that I myself have. So the answer is yes, we are working on them right now as ICTA CERT and the TRC. It has strategically placed together under the highest office in Sri Lanka right now for strategic guidance. And I think we have never seen before synergies across these strategic organizations right now, which is working hand in glove to ensure these questions are addressed.
Thank you so much. Do let the audience know that due to the time limitation, we are not able to proceed with further questions. But thank you so much. Let me thank once again Director General at Telecommunication Regulatory Commission of Sri Lanka, Osha Desena Naika, for his time. Once again, thank you so much on behalf of Sri Lanka, sir. Let me thank you for your time and for being with us. Thank you. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, that ends the first session for today. So we have one more session coming up this afternoon on, yes, it's on digital crime. So I think it's on, I haven't got the agenda, but yes, we have another session. If you would like to, please do look at on our Facebook page or on our website. It kicks off at 2 to 3. So please be connected. Let me not forget to thank our sponsors, SLT Mobitel Dialogue, for giving us free data for all our constituents to watch this program live, and also POTV thanks for telecasting it live. Cisco has given us an amazing platform called WebEx to host this entire event. Thank you, Cisco. And who would be giving us the Hacking Challenge, a platform to host the Hacking Challenge, which is again on the 28th. If you're not still registered and you'd like to be part of that event, please do go to our site and register yourself before it's too late. So with that, thank you so much for all of you for being part of this event, and I hope to connect with you guys again at 2 this afternoon. Thank you.